The word that Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths." For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Here ends the reading of words that give us insights into God. May God grant us courage and wisdom for interpretation.
Well, I came across an article this week. It was called 11 Sounds That Your Children Have Probably Never Heard. And I have to admit that I hadn't heard many of these sounds either. But luckily it was online and they were linked to YouTube videos so I could go and hear what they sounded like. I want to play some of these sounds for you, and I want to see if you know what they are. If you do, just say them out loud. Here's the first one. Rotary phone. That's right. Some of you must have used those. Before there were iPhones with apps, there were indeed rotary phones. Here's the next one. Typewriter. I heard that pretty quick. Some of you must have spent many hours on a typewriter. Here's the next one.
Is it a car starter?
A pogo stick, a car starter. Any other guesses? Record player? A price worker? Price marker? All good guesses, but no, before there were iPhones with cameras in our pockets, there were cameras with flash cubes. Here's another one. A toilet? Before there were Keurigs or Mr. Coffees, there were coffee percolators. Coffee percolators. Here's another one. Andrew, you might want to turn this one down a little bit. It's a little louder. It is a film roll, a film projector. I thought for sure people would have shown films of family vacations. One more. Gas station, that's right. It could have been any number of bells, but it was indeed a full-service gas station bell. You all did pretty well at that. I'm not saying that you all are old, I'm just saying that you have a keen sense of hearing. It's interesting, isn't it, how our senses can help us connect with the past? How sights, sounds, and smells can transport us from one place to another. Could any of you see images of those sounds in your mind's eye once you realized what it was? Perhaps if you had spent hours at the typewriter, maybe you could remember that. That's what the season of Advent does for us. It's a time when we are able to more fully connect with our Christian tradition, with the ancient rituals of the church. It's a time when we can set aside as being a sacred remembrance, a sacred time of preparation for Christ's birth. I thought on this Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent, the hanging of the greens, when we adorn the church with so many sacred symbols, so many sights, so many sounds, so many smells that may have some familiarity, it might help if we talked about what some of these things mean. I wanted to do that today, to talk about what some of our symbols in the church are and what they mean. You probably know that Advent comes from the Latin adventus, from the Greek parousia, which all mean coming or arrival, because we're waiting for the arrival of Christ. Today is the first Sunday in Advent, which means it's the new year in the church, which means that last night was basically New Year's Eve. Did anyone stay up till midnight and pop the cork on champagne? Jana Lee? The champagne too, Jana Lee? No, just the staying up late. Oh. This is New Year in the church. We start off the year by waiting for the arrival of the Christ child, and also longing for Jesus' continued presence in our lives today. As odd as it may sound, the first church didn't celebrate Christmas, and there was no Advent. It's telling that the first gospel that was written, the Gospel of Mark, does not contain a birth narrative. It simply wasn't the most important thing to the early church. In fact, the first season in the church tradition was the liturgical season of Lent leading up to Easter, a 40-day penitential season where believers prayed and fasted, concentrated on contemplative practices, preparing their hearts for Easter. And it was particularly important for new Christians to prepare themselves for baptism. When the church eventually adopted Christmas, another 40-day season of penitence was added before the Christmas season, called Advent. That season was eventually shortened, but it was still seen for a very long time as a penitential season. For a long time, the liturgical color most clearly associated with Advent was the same as Lent, purple, the color of penitence and royalty. But over the past several decades, there's been a movement in churches to use a light blue color, which we use all around our sanctuary. Light blue is the color of hopeful and expectant waiting. It's supposed to represent the color of the night sky that the Magi watched, waiting for the star to rise so that they could follow it to the Christ child. By using blue all around the sanctuary, we are shifting this season from being one of penitence to being one of hope. It's a way that we dare to hope in the midst of this season. One of our most beloved traditions in the church, and especially here at University Christian Church, is the lighting of the Advent candles. The lighting of Advent candles can be traced back to the 1830s. There was a German Protestant pastor who had started a missionary school for young children. And he grew tired of the children running up to him every day saying, "When is Christmas going to be here?" I'm sure some of you who have had kids know what that's like. When is Christmas going to be here? So he took an old cart wheel, he turned it over, and he placed several candles around the wheel. There were 24 small red candles and then 4 large white candles. They lit one of the small candles each day, Monday through Saturday, and then on Sunday lit one of the large white candles until they had finally reached Christmas. This tradition gained a lot of popularity and eventually spread even to the United States. But since most Christians gathered primarily on Sunday, they did away with the smaller candles and just kept the larger candles. They began to represent core tenets of our faith: hope, peace, joy, and love, all centered around the Christ candle. You may notice that 3 of these candles are light blue, the liturgical color for the season, but 1 candle is pink. That's the candle that we light on the 3rd Sunday of Advent for joy. But why is that candle pink? This has to do with the fact that Advent was originally seen as a second Lent. During Lent, there were these several Sundays of fasting, and on the 4th Sunday of Lent, the priests eventually decided that that was too much fasting, too much prayer, and too much contemplation. And so on the 4th Sunday of Lent, they would break the fast, and they would have a day of celebration. On that day, the deep violet color was lightened to a light pink, and it was a joyful Sunday. In fact, the Pope would take a pink flower and would give it to one of the ordinary congregants as a sign of joy. And so, when the season of Advent was created, that Sunday of joy, of light pink, came with it. And we now celebrate that on the 3rd Sunday of Advent. Evergreens are an important part of our holiday representation, our holiday celebration. Evergreens have a long history associated with Christmas. In fact, even before Christians began observing Christmas, the ancient world used evergreens. The Romans used it as a symbol of peace, of joy, of victory. And in other ancient cultures, it began to represent eternal life. This made a natural kind of association with Christians. And so they took the evergreens and they put them in a circle, like our wreaths up here. The circle was supposed to represent God's oneness and God's never-ending presence. By placing a circular evergreen in their homes, early Christians were saying that Christ had entered there. As time went on, the circle began to represent the crown of thorns, especially if it had red berries in it, representing the red blood from the thorn. Perhaps the most recognizable symbol of Christmas is the Christmas tree. There's a lot of debate about when the Christmas tree really entered into the Christian tradition. Some think that the Vikings and the Saxons worshiped trees, and because of where they lived, worshiped evergreen trees. And so when they adopted Christianity, they brought the evergreen tree with them. That's one possibility. Other people point to the fact that in medieval times, there were these things called medieval passion plays, sometimes called mystery plays. And what they would do is they would reenact the stories in the Bible. They would tell the stories, and they would almost always have an evergreen tree to represent the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They would decorate it with apples to represent the forbidden fruit. Over time, people took the trees and placed them in their own homes so that they could continue to tell the story. This was done particularly at Christmas time. The reason we have lights is another debated issue. Some people point to Martin Luther. There's a possibly apocryphal tale that one day Martin Luther was walking out in the forest, and the sun set and the stars began to come out, and he was just entranced by the stars and wanted to take that with him. So he cut down an evergreen tree and took it to his home and placed candles in the tree branches so that he could see the night sky even in his home. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it sure makes for a good story. These symbols help us to connect to our faith. And when we see them, it's important that we realize why it is that we have them around. Of course, none of these symbols were original to the early church. Jesus and his disciples wouldn't have had a clue what they meant. But over the years, Christians have adopted them as a way to prepare ourselves for this sacred season. It's important to note that we really have no idea when Jesus was born. Scholars debate about this. It almost certainly wasn't December 25th, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that during this time period, we set time aside to hope. That's what the season of Advent is all about, daring to hope. We live in a world where we need to hope. We need hope. We're bombarded with bad news. We're told that things are hopeless. But one of the most important lessons of our faith is that we must hold fast to hope. It's one of the well springs of our faith that keeps us going, the notion of hope. During Advent, we hold fast to hope that a better world is possible. That with the coming of Christ, both the first time and then over and over again in our lives, each and every day, that through that arrival of Christ's presence, the world is a better place. This Advent, may we hold fast to hope, that we might live in a more peaceful, a more joyous, and a more loving world, so that this world might be the one that God desires it to be. May it be so. Amen.